A number of architectural disasters, man-made or otherwise, have plagued Kansas City in the contemporary era. There was the caving of the roof of the Kemper Arena in 1979. Just a few years after it had been built, it was specifically built to attract the 1976 Republican National Convention. The 1981 collapse of two walkways in the Hyatt Regency Hotel, which killed over 100 people and was the deadliest structural collapse in the United States until the really bad one in 2001. The 1987 controlled demolition of 5 out of 5 Wayne Minor Court Section 8 towers because Kansas City just had to one-up Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis. And something which is not a disaster in the conventional sense, but maybe you'll see how terrifying it is by the end of this episode. The late 2000s construction of the Sprint Center and the Power and Light District. Something else terrible that happened in Kansas City is I grew up there, which I mentioned for a couple of reasons. One is that I have 20 years of intimate connection to the city, yet only as I began researching it did I realize how little I had been taught about the infernal history of this place and the heinous machinations that made it look and feel the way it does today. The other reason is that much of what I say here is anecdotal. That means I can say whatever I want and you can't fact check me. This story isn't about facts or reason or logic, none of which care about my feelings. It's a story. It's the story of Suicide Hill.
Here at Brookside Park, we've still got about an inch of snow, and that's enough to be able to do this.
Suicide Hill, officially known as Brookside Park, is a park that everybody in the neighborhood of Brookside and the city at large goes to sled when it snows. I spent many winters here sledding and many summers here biking. It's a nice steep hill, and the reason we always speculated it was called Suicide Hill is that there are a few trees right at the bottom that could spell your doom if you built up enough speed and lost control. Recently, somebody started a petition encouraging locals to no longer refer to it by this ominous nickname. So maybe my perpetuation of this urban legend is problematic. I'll let you be the judge in the comments. Suicide Hill is adjacent to the Trolley Track Trail, a protected bike path about 5 miles long that runs on the former path of a popular streetcar line. Trolley Track Trail begins at the Country Club Plaza, which is a privately owned shopping neighborhood that's made to look like Seville, Spain. It was opened in the 1920s developed by a guy named JC Nichols, who is a true scumbag, as we'll soon see. Then the trail takes you through a couple of grocery store parking lots that form the core of the Brookside Shopping Center. Then you go through Waldo, a quaint little commercial corridor where you can stop and get a slice of famous Waldo pizza or a slice of famous Papa John's pizza. Just to the west of here, across the state line, are the Levittown-esque subdivisions of Mission Hills and Prairie Village. These are isolated and affluent communities that JC Nichols built as a place for all of his shoppers in the Country Club Plaza to settle down after they were done shopping. Growing up in Kansas City, you hear JC Nichols' name all the time. You probably drove down JC Nichols Parkway to get to Winstead's or the Cheesecake Factory. Saw hundreds of for sale homes with the Reese Nichols logo in the front lawn. But I never knew that he was a pioneer of the restrictive covenants that prohibited black people and Jewish people from moving into any of these beautifully manicured neighborhoods. Every city in America had its own path to segregation and white flight, but rarely is there one tangible boogeyman to blame. So I guess in this case we're lucky. The trolley track trail ends at 85th and Prospect at this industrial park. What a huge difference between the bustling extravagance at one end of this trail and the almost rural desolation at the other. Not to mention the fact that just before 85th Street, the trail takes you through this patch of dense woods and dumps you out right in front of Sleepy Hollow Road. This is only slightly less eerie to me now as when I first encountered it as an 11-year-old. Now, I've talked on this channel before about haunted architecture and the way buildings carry traces of what used to be there. But there's something about the entire Kansas City metropolitan area that feels like unfinished business. Kansas City is surrounded by a bunch of other towns and villages. It also straddles the border of Missouri, and Kansas. Although the metro area is fairly large, Kansas City proper really only refers to this narrow stretch from the 435 Beltway to downtown. Everything, for the most part, outside of that has its own government, its own characteristics, and its own income. There's Platte County, which is technically part of Kansas City, but we can talk about that later. Biking down the trolley track trail, it's hard not to feel like you're traversing the skeleton of a city that used to thrive on transit-oriented development. Each of these nodes in this cluster used to be connected by the largest streetcar system in the country, until it was scrapped in the 1950s, of course. This vast transit network lay dormant for decades, and each of these little Levittown villages grew into itself until downtown was finally strangled by the creation of the I-35 and the I-70, which just happened to bisect the thriving African-American cultural center of 18th and Vine. And in the 1970s, this noose was tightened by the construction of Highway 71, which just happened to bisect a bunch of low-income African-American neighborhoods which were formed in the wake of JC Nichols' restrictive covenants and were then explicitly walled off at Troost Avenue by the public school district, which to this day in Kansas City proper is one of the worst in the nation because all the money in the area lives across state line. The schools there are very good. So the blood flow to downtown was cut off by this loop of highways, and it just festered there. It became a ghost town. Parking lots and largely vacant mid-rise office towers. We haven't even mentioned yet the reason Kansas City exists, which is this giant river. And look at the development around here. Industrial park, gravel, shrubs, the Kemper Arena, I guess now the Hy-Vee Arena, which is publicly maintained but privately operated at a $500,000 deficit by the American Royal, who has converted this entire pocket of riverfront real estate into affordable housing for horses. Apparently, a lot of this riverfront land is not the best for building, but I'm reading this script from my home in Chicago, where the Army Corps reversed a fucking river 100 years ago. So sound off in the comments, I guess, about what should be done with the Missouri River. So this arena sucks, and no meaningful development ever cropped up around it like we were all promised when we performed the public-private partnership ritual. There was a big flood in the 90s, and in 2007, the city made a deal with the devil and performed a new public partnership ritual to summon the Power and Light District. This deal was made with the Cordish Company out of Baltimore, who built a new arena, the Sprint Center, and next to it they built up this 9-block neighborhood of sports bars that all meet at this big atrium where they have concerts, I guess. Here's some of the big events they bring into play.
There's so much great things happening here in Kansas City.
I saw Group Love there once and got drunk off $9 Bud Lights. Yeah, I guess that's the cool thing about it. You're allowed to walk around outside with an open container, which I don't think you can do in a lot of other places. So the Power and Light District is a gigantic public investment that costs taxpayers while making out-of-state developers richer. In 2012, it lost $12 million in tax dollars. It's kind of been an adrenaline shot to downtown that's fueled a handful of luxury housing developments around it, also owned by Cordish, also benefiting from Kansas City's extremely generous 25-year tax abatement. These are certainly cause for public outcry, but what really made the Power and Light District controversial was the dress code. When it first opened in 2008, this public, extremely walkable neighborhood had signs everywhere that you weren't allowed to enter if you were wearing a white t-shirt, work boots, long or baggy clothing, chain and necklaces, shorts below the knee, athletic wear, bandanas, and because of how selectively it was enforced, it came to be known as a code for do not enter if you're black. This caused a number of complaints and lawsuits, and the dress code was marginally slackened right before a bunch of predominantly black conventions were said to arrive in town. But to this day, the Power and Light District regularly comes under fire for discrimination and intimidation of black guests. And we know it's discrimination because they also hosted a white trash costume party where they waved the cover for people in white trash attire. As mentioned, in the past decade, the Power and Light District has somewhat brought downtown back from the dead to mixed success at the expense of the taxpayers who live in all these other little neighborhoods that became neglected once the streetcar was gone. And the kicker of it all is that the Power and Light District came with its own streetcar.
Welcome to Kansas City. Navigating our convention package has just got a lot easier with our new Kansas City streetcar. The new streetcar, which is now open, connects our convention district to our entertainment district.
This is the KC streetcar, which stretches a whopping 2 miles from the River Market to Union Station. Union Station is a gutted out husk of a train terminal, which has now been possessed by museums. The KC streetcar serves a few thousand people a day, and it's funded by taxpayers in the neighborhoods that it operates in. It's free, which is cool, right? It's so cool, apparently, that voters recently approved a 3 3/4 mile expansion south down Main Street through the hip neighborhood of Westport, through the Art Institute, through the Country Club Plaza, and dropping you off right at the start of the Harry Wiggins Trolley Track Trail. Is Kansas City on track to exhume its old world-class trolley system and reunite these isolated, neglected neighborhoods? Will measures ever be taken to make up for the decades of segregation and redlining? Will the streetcar ever go east of Troost? Why is the biggest proponent of the streetcar a conservative dipshit who lives in Virginia?
And I'm hampered by some of the media in the city that doesn't like me, and they're liberally oriented, a liberal agenda, and I'm a conservative. Why isn't that taxpayer money being used for its intended purpose, improving libraries, infrastructure, schools? And take that savings and immediately hire over 100 plus community police officers. We're serious about fighting crime. Black youths that are killing black youths.
Is this new urbanism? Who is Jane Jacobs? I think we can all agree that whatever happens, it's going to take a real Frankenstein to stitch this city back together. So let me know if your city is doing something spooky like this, or if your city has a plan to revitalize its abandoned transit system, or if you have a cool Halloween costume that you want to share. And check out these articles by Marie-Alice Le Hureau. After you read those articles, you can support this channel with a Patreon pledge, where you can get access to some bonus episodes and interviews with people like Frank Chapman, Do Not Eat, and Twitter celebrity Leftist Thought 420. All right, thanks for watching. Ghouls, smell my feet. Bye.